Welcome to everyone, and thank you for joining us today. We know how valuable your time is, and we thank you for choosing to spend the next hour with us as we explore the link between forced migration and human trafficking, and legislation that is currently before Congress that is poised to help break that link. Today's session will focus specifically on how immigration courts can help protect vulnerable children from trafficking. As we continue to focus our efforts on preventing vulnerable children from becoming victims of human trafficking. Please note, this webinar is being recorded and it will be made available to all who registered for today's event. Details for accessing the recording will be sent to you after today's event. I am Sister Sally Duffy, a Sister of Charity from Cincinnati, Ohio, and I serve on the board of the Alliance to End Human Trafficking. And I will be the moderator for our discussion today. I would like to start by centering us in a moment of prayer. Loving God, in your infinite compassion, we seek your divine protection for unaccompanied children who are often alone and afraid. Provide solace to those who have been witnesses to violence and destruction, who have lost parents or families, friends, home, and all they cherish due to war, persecution, corruption, gang violence, and climate change. Comfort them in their sorrow and bring help in their time of need. Show mercy to unaccompanied migrant children and reunite them with their families and loved ones. And guide those children who are strangers in a foreign land to a place of peace, safety, hospitality, and protection from exploitation and trafficking. And open our hearts to migrant and refugee children in need, so that we might see in them your own migrant son and assure their God-given dignity. Give us the courage and the wisdom to stand up in their defense against those who would do them harm. And please direct our efforts to provide the necessary trauma-informed care for trafficked children so they can maximize their potential and thrive. Amen. So let's set the context a little bit here. Women religious have at their core mission protecting the vulnerable, which of course includes vulnerable children. Catholic sisters and our colleagues have been working on common sense proposals that would make meaningful progress in improving immigration proceedings for unaccompanied children and be a redesigned formal process to hopefully prevent human trafficking. We've been exploring the checkpoints that exist in our current systems through which children who are vulnerable to trafficking can be identified and helped. We believe that the court system is one of those few checkpoints for appropriate intervention, and that courts can do more to identify and help vulnerable children, thereby saving victims from abuse, fraud, and coercion. It is a fact that unaccompanied children face a complex court system alone without legal services or social services. We've heard anecdotal information of unaccompanied children as young as 3 or 4 alone in court. We are also aware of concerns about how unaccompanied children can be released to sponsors or guardians, and that improvements are needed to ensure that these children are not being at risk for trafficking. Today, you will hear proposals for a special court with judges and lawyers who are specially trained in human trafficking to help unaccompanied children. Special thanks to our sponsors, 2 faith-filled organizations with long histories of working to end human trafficking. The Alliance to End Human Trafficking, founded and supported by U.S. Catholic Sisters, and the National Advocacy Center of the Sisters of the Good Shepherd. Both organizations have made our efforts and this webinar possible. I would now like to introduce our speakers who will share their experiences and their insights in this important topic. Evelyn Chumbo is the Operations and Survivor Leadership Director with the Human Trafficking Legal Center. The center recently launched the Harriet Tubman Fellowship that will provide support for trafficking survivors as they pursue individual career training. Evelyn is a survivor of child labor trafficking, and Evelyn has made it her life's work to fight trafficking, and she works to raise awareness to create employment opportunities for trafficking survivors. Evelyn has briefed government agencies about human trafficking from a survivor's perspective, including the Department of Homeland Security, the FBI, the State Department, and the Department of Justice. Jason Boyd is Senior Director of Policy for Kids in Need of Defense, commonly referred to as KIND. We thank KIND, Kids in Need of Defense, for their initiation of the legislation that is right now in our United States Congress that Jason will highlight during this webinar. Jason oversees policy initiatives to advance the rights of unaccompanied children. He's worked in the past to strengthen protections for children and for vulnerable immigrant populations, and to seek fair treatment of asylum seekers. Jason was an asylum officer at the United States Citizenship and Immigration Services, where he adjudicated the asylum applications of unaccompanied children and others seeking protection after fleeing persecution. Jason earned his bachelor's from the University of North Carolina and his Juris Doctorate with honors from George Washington University Law School. Jennifer Bibby Girth is a senior managing attorney with Immigration Legal Services at Catholic Charities of the Archdiocese of Washington, D.C. Jennifer holds a bachelor's degree in social work and Spanish from the University of Alabama, a master's of social work degree from the University of Tennessee, and a Juris Doctor from American University, Washington College of Law. She is licensed to practice law in Maryland. Jennifer has also worked as an asylum officer for the United States Citizenship and Immigration Services, known as USCIS, at their Arlington Asylum Office. At Catholic Charities in DC, Jennifer represented clients seeking family and humanitarian-based immigration benefits. And she specializes in representing applicants for asylum and applicants for special immigrant juvenile status. We'll hear from each of our speakers in turn and then welcome the executive directors, Katie and Fran, of our sponsoring organizations, who will talk to us about how we can join their efforts to affect public policy. And we will leave time for questions from all of you. As we proceed, we invite you to write any questions you have in the Q&A box, which you can access in the lower toolbar of Zoom. So let me begin with Evelyn. Evelyn, we thank you for your willingness to share your life experience with us today. So let me turn the floor over to you so we can learn more about your personal experience with human trafficking. And hopefully you can share the vital perspective of how ending human trafficking has become your life's work.
Thank you, Sister Sally, for having me, and thank you for the prayer. Again, my name is Evelyn Chumbo. I am a survivor activist of child forced labor. I know we only have 5 minutes, but I can talk forever because my personal experience is so long. But going back, if you know, to, about my personal story, I was trafficked from Cameroon to the United States at age 9 until you could say 17. And as we focus on unaccompanied minor, I came here unaccompanied, but again, I got on the plane. And for my parents, you know, the dream was to come here to the United States to get a better opportunity, good education. And for me, I know for me, it was just the eyes of television shows that I used to watch while I was in Cameroon, like The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, 90210, and The Cosby Show. You know, I just thought coming to the United States, the United States would be just like the television show. Yes, it was also to get an education, but I really just thought America was just like The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air and the Bill Cosby Show. I never thought that I would come to the United States and become a victim of child forced labor and be taking care of 2 kids at age 9. My trafficker, who was also Cameroonian but a U.S. citizen, used 1 passport and brought 6 of us into the United States. I first arrived in London, and again, I never knew that I came to the United States illegally. I never knew that I came to the United States illegally until my case was investigated. So with all of that, because we can be here forever, I ran away from my trafficker, going to seek help. I went to actually Catholic charity. I went to a Catholic, I went to a church and I told my story. And from there, I met some of the people that worked on my case at Catholic Charity. And while, you know, they were investigating my case, making sure that everything I said was true, I was placed into foster care. And if I, you know, just to go a little back, me living with my trafficker, I did not go to school. At age 9, I was taking care of 2 kids. I was physically and emotional, you know, beaten. So when we're thinking about this, especially if you're going to have um children that were forced to work at such a long age, or you know, such a young age, we definitely want to be thinking about trauma informed. And you know, so while in foster care, I also, you know, experienced so many other things, did not really understand how the US function. I didn't know much. And even document wise, I never knew that I came here illegally. I never knew that I needed a document to stay in the US. And with that being said, my case was prosecuted, took, you know, went to trial, And my case was also investigated all the way back to my home country, Cameroon. And I had to testify in court, and I had to also see my trafficker for, for a while, which was very scary. And sometimes, depending on who your trafficker is, it is so hard for us, you know, especially being a child. Yes, I was a teenager at the time I went to court, but thinking about it, I wish there was somebody there, like a program or something, or thinking about, I know they wanted to prosecute the case, but sometimes I wish they had also thought about me reuniting with my family, going back home. But that would be good. If you're dealing with children that came here unaccompanied, some of us didn't come with family members. Some of us come and we stay with people and they're taken advantage of. But doing my court case, I would say the judge seemed to be, was good, but did not understand my situation. And the prosecutors in my case were really good. But one thing I remember was my attorney, my immigration attorney, Melanie on her. To this day, I still call her my Melanie, because she was always there teaching me my rights, making me not to feel like I was wrong going to testify. And just the fact that she was just being honest with me and being transparent. I never forget Melanie about that. So when we're talking about the court system, it was so great to have an attorney that saw that what happened to me was so horrible, but it was guiding me and teaching me about what to do, and just being there and just being my friend and doing the job with compassion. you know um so with that being said, I know I only got 5 minutes, so I want to give time to the rest of the speakers. But with that being said, my case was prosecuted. My trafficker went to prison for she was given 5 years, but then she ran away and was sentenced up to 17 years. And even with that, when we are victims of the situation and the court goes to case, we get threatened and things like that. And so, my trafficker has gotten out of prison, and was a little bit disappointed with the court system or the justice system in America, because I wasn't told that my trafficker was out. I wasn't informed that they didn't give me any letter. I had to find out from a friend that, oh, you need to be careful because your trafficker is out. So for any lawyers that are listening here that are dealing with cases, especially with kids, that are minors like myself, it is so important for you to teach your clients their rights, and really, really always check on them as well, and making sure that the victim coordinator, special coordinator, gets in touch with them, because we don't know all of that, especially when we come from another country. So I'll leave it there, and maybe hopefully for questions, I can provide more insight. Thank you, Sister Sally.
Oh, no, Evelyn, thank you. Thank you for sharing your powerful story, and for taking your own pain and serving others in unbelievable ways. Now I'm going to turn to Jason Boyd from KIND, Kids in Need of Defense. And Jason's going to share his thoughts on the legislation that was introduced, the Immigration Court Efficiency and Children's Court Act. It's Senate Bill 3178. And Jason, could you explain a little bit about the legislation and how it's going to help protect unaccompanied children from human trafficking, and anything else about the legislation that would be valuable for us to know? Thanks, Jason.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Sally. I'm Jason Boyd with KIND. Great to be with you all. Let me express my gratitude to the Alliance and National Advocacy Center for this conversation on a bill whose time has come. As many of you know, the U.S. immigration court system is fundamentally designed for adults, not children. Throughout its history, this system has failed to properly account for unaccompanied children's unique vulnerabilities, their age, developmental stage, trauma history, communication and comprehension constraints. That mismatch has spurred widespread due process deprivations, spawn procedural inefficiencies that sap limited court resources, and disserve children who are survivors of or vulnerable to trafficking and exploitation. That means missed opportunities to harness local legal services providers who can help identify and respond to trafficking indicators. And it means the absence of a truly fair, child appropriate legal process through which children can seek safety from traffickers and other bad actors. In November of last year, a bipartisan, bicameral group of congressional champions stepped forward and said, we can and must do better. Senators Bennett and Murkowski, alongside Representatives Goldman and Salazar, introduced the Immigration Court Efficiency and Children's Court Act, a bill that helps meet kids where they're at. Kind applauds these champions for their across the aisle leadership. By drawing from best practices for children's legal proceedings employed in other judicial settings, the Children's Court Act would establish what it calls specialized children's dockets at immigration courts nationwide. Those dockets would be dedicated to the adjudication of unaccompanied children's removal proceedings and distinguished by three key features. First, the act would mandate a specialized corps of immigration judges assigned to these proceedings and who would receive in-depth continuing training, including on child trafficking specific to this population's cases. Second, the act would establish child-appropriate court procedures responsive to the developmental levels of child respondents, and that would help streamline court operations. And third, the act would require that these dockets robustly coordinate with local legal services providers and pro bono attorneys. Let me talk about a few ways in which these reforms would help combat child trafficking. By requiring courts to coordinate with local legal services providers, and in fact, by mandating dedicated space in court buildings where providers can engage with children, the bill would help position those providers to identify evidence of trafficking and alert authorities where appropriate. Attorneys may comprise the only adults to whom children feel safe disclosing information about mistreatment. They can help those children understand their legal rights and options for extrication from exploitative situations. They can also facilitate access to vital support services, including psychosocial support for traumatized kids. Absent these checkpoints with attorneys, too often trafficking goes undetected and unremedied. And I should emphasize as well that these checkpoints would help improve the efficiency of the court system as a whole. Additionally, by requiring employment of child-appropriate court procedures, the act would create a fairer process through which children with significant capacity challenges and other vulnerabilities could pursue immigration relief and benefits when eligible under the law. We're talking about T visas for trafficking victims, U visas for victims of labor-related crimes, employment authorization documents that can serve as vital identification documents for children and enable older youth to access lawful, safe, appropriate work. All of the above serve as shields against child trafficking. They help deliver the stability, connect children to the resources and opportunities, promote the local community integration critical to lasting security for these kids. So if this bill were enacted, it would strengthen due process, enhance government efficiency, and yes, it would advance the fight against child trafficking. In December, the immigration court system issued new guidance affirming the establishment of what it calls juvenile dockets at immigration courts throughout the country. These dockets are dedicated to the adjudication of unaccompanied children's cases and must adhere to more child-appropriate efficiency enhancing procedures. In key respects, this guidance echoes core elements of the Children's Court Act. It's a hugely important step in the right direction, and Kind strongly commends the administration for taking it. But it remains imperative that Congress embrace the more robust, more comprehensive, more enduring Children's Court Act. Senators Bennett and Murkowski, Representatives Goldman and Salazar have lit a strong bipartisan path forward to help combat child trafficking. We urge Congress to pass this bill into law. I'll go ahead and leave it there and look forward to any questions.
Jason, thank you for that comprehensive overview. That was extremely helpful. Jennifer, we know that you have different facets of professional experience working with and on behalf of unaccompanied minors. What conditions have you seen that have made your unaccompanied minor clients more vulnerable to trafficking? And if a non-citizen has been trafficked, what can they do to obtain legal status in the United States? And what benefits would our government provide to help them get back on their feet?
Thank you, Sally. I want to address your first question about why these children are more vulnerable to trafficking. I want to explain what group of children we are talking about today. These are children who have been designated as unaccompanied non-citizen children by the Department of Homeland Security. So that means that they are under the age of 18. They do not have a lawful immigration status, and they do not have a parent who is available to provide them with care and custody at that time when the Department of Homeland Security officers meet the children. So if it is Border Patrol who meets an unaccompanied non-citizen children, Border Patrol will transfer the child to the custody of the Office of Refugee Resettlement, which cares for the child in a shelter until the child can be reunified with a family member or a person of the parent's choice. So these shelters are run by nonprofit organizations. One example is Baptist Children's Services. The shelters are like dormitories. And right away, when a child enters the shelter, there's a caseworker who begins working with the child to contact the parents or other family members with whom the child can reunify. So even though the child did not have a parent with them when they arrived in the United States, they might have a parent who is already living in the United States. So this is the stage where the Office of Refugee Resettlement has the first opportunity to protect the children from trafficking. So of course, the Office of Refugee Resettlement vets the sponsor and tries to ensure that the child is safe, but there's also a lot of pressure to get the child out of the shelter as soon as possible, maybe pressure from the child themselves. Maybe the shelter needs to make openings for more children who have more recently arrived. So the children that are the most vulnerable to trafficking are the children who do not have a parent present in the United States. So these children might be reunified with a more distant family member, such as an aunt or a cousin, or with a family friend. And the children who are reunified with a person who was not the person who raised them are the most vulnerable. For example, I've had 2 clients who were teenagers who were trafficked by family members. In one case, an older cousin trafficked a young man by forcing him to work for the cousin's company without pay. And in another case, an aunt trafficked a young woman by forcing her to work at fast food restaurants and turn over her paychecks to her aunt. In both of these cases, the family members with whom the children reunified were not the people who raised the child. And the family members were able to convince the child that they had to repay a debt to the family member for financing the child's travel to the United States. In these 2 cases, and in other cases where the prospective client comes to Catholic Charities, We will screen them to determine if they have been trafficked. A client might be eligible for a T visa, which is an immigration status that will allow them to remain in the United States, and it will allow them to eventually become a green card holder and later a United States citizen. So in order to qualify for a T visa, a non-citizen must have been a victim of a severe form of trafficking. They must be present in the United States on account of trafficking. In some cases, they must have cooperated with law enforcement to investigate or prosecute the traffickers. And last, they must show that they will experience extreme hardship if they cannot remain in the United States. So to establish that a person has been subjected to labor trafficking, they must show that the trafficker or the abuser, we could say, used force, fraud, or coercion to make the victim work in an abusive setting or to work without being paid appropriately. Regarding the requirement that the child must be present in the United States on account of trafficking, that doesn't mean that they only qualify if the trafficker was the person who brought them to the United States. That might be true, but that's not required. The requirement is that an applicant for a T visa show that there is a connection between the fact that they were trafficked and the reason that they are in the United States right now. When a child is the victim of trafficking, the child is not required to cooperate with law enforcement, but they can cooperate with law enforcement if they choose. So if a child feels that they don't want to prosecute the trafficker, maybe it's just too painful or just too scary, they don't have to. And last, regarding extreme hardship, often the reason why the child fled their country in the first place is related to the reason why they would experience extreme hardship should they have to go back. For people who are approved for T visas, that means that they can sponsor their parents and younger siblings and certain other family members to also get T visas. In a few years, they can get a green card, and eventually down the road, they will qualify for United States citizenship. Thank you.
Jennifer, thank you for clearly articulating and addressing the conditions and the benefits that are available. So now let's turn to the executive directors of the two sponsoring organizations, Fran and Katie. Fran Esken-Royer is executive director of the National Advocacy Center of the Sisters of the Good Shepherd, and Katie Bowler-Goswich is the executive director of the Alliance to End Human Trafficking. So can the two of you tell us why your organization supports this legislation and how our participants can help take action as we work to help these children? And Fran, if you will go ahead and go first.
Sure. Thank you so much, Sister Sally. First, I want to echo and convey our sincere thanks again to Evelyn, to Jason, and to Jennifer for your important contributions to this webinar, and to you, Sister Sally, for guiding our discussion. To begin to answer your question, I'll share a little bit about NAC. The National Advocacy Center of the Sisters of the Good Shepherd lifts up the advocacy priorities of both the sisters in the U.S. and the Good Shepherd social service agencies across the country. In particular, we seek to support those the agencies serve, those living on the margins. Because of this, NAC's advocacy portfolio is broad. We focus primarily on issues of poverty, immigration, and human trafficking. And we also consider their root causes, among them violence, racism, and environmental degradation. And for those of you who might not know much about the Congregation of Our Lady of Charity of the Good Shepherd, better known as the Sisters of the Good Shepherd, it's an international religious order of women that has a representative at the United Nations, a worldwide reputation for supporting survivors of human trafficking, and a deep commitment to those living on the margins, particularly women and children. So, the Children's Court Bill is legislation that the National Advocacy Center of the Sisters of the Good Shepherd is drawn to because it centers on the needs of children, just as Jason outlined. In this case, migrant unaccompanied children. It strives to better protect them in general and in particular from trafficking. You might remember a photo that got a good deal of press a few years ago of a nun in blue who was arrested in the Russell Senate office building in the district. She was part of a witness drawing attention to children who died in detention at the border. That was a Good Shepherd sister. And that photo conveys an important part of NAC's and the congregation's mission. NAC is also pleased that this legislation is bipartisan. NAC works to demonstrate its nonpartisanship and welcomes that this legislation is an opportunity for Congress to show what it can do when it reaches across the aisle. So that's why we're behind this legislation wholeheartedly. And I'll stop there and invite Katie to share a bit about the Alliance's connection to the legislation and how together we can all take action.
Thank you, Fran. And I echo our thanks to Sister Sally, to Jennifer, to Jason, to Evelyn for sharing their stories and their passion for this work to end human trafficking. The Alliance to End Human Trafficking was founded just a little over 10 years ago by a core group of 15 sisters who really reached across the congregational aisle. And they were 15 sisters from 15 different congregations, really dedicated to addressing the root causes of human trafficking. So we look at the various reasons, as the systemic reasons that human trafficking is an issue in today's world. And we really want to see what we can do to sort of mitigate some of those risks that people face. One of the root causes of human trafficking that we do address is forced migration. And that is why this project really resonated with us as an organization. We're also connected to the International Talitha Kum International, which is the movement of consecrated life of the church located in Rome that really looks at human trafficking through the lens of root causes across the globe. When this particular project was brought to us, we really wanted to look at what legislative and policy-based solutions could be made to mitigate some of the risk faced by individuals who were in danger of being trafficked. And we came up with 3 different areas, and one of those areas was the children's court docket. We are incredibly deeply committed to seeing this through, to seeing it passed. We'd like to see it to be made law. We're thrilled that it's got bipartisan support. We are very happy to be, growing our own expertise and the expertise of our partners to work with each other to really make these solutions a reality. I think when you look at unaccompanied minors and you think about a 3-year-old standing before a judge by themselves, it really is just a horrible picture to have to think about. And that it happens in this country is challenging. And I think it challenges us to stand up and do something. And so we really, are calling ourselves to action, calling our members and our allies and partners to action. And I believe, Fran, you are going to tell them about the Action Alert link.
Sure. Thanks, Katie. We've created an action alert, and I believe it will be dropped in the chat shortly. And it also will be shared with you at the end of this webinar and after the webinar. So there'll be plenty of opportunities for you to connect with it. But it's going to allow you to connect with your senators and your representative and urge them to co-sponsor and pass this common sense legislation that Jason laid out so beautifully. We really want you to join us in calling for this. And if you'd like, the alert, it'll be pre-populated. So you'll put in your address and it will connect you to your legislators. And there's a pre-made message for you to send, but you can also personalize it. That's always great to do. And send it to your senators and your representative. And hopefully we can build momentum and build on the bipartisan support we already have and get more support and get it made into law. So that's the plan. So we all just need to do our part. I think that's it. Sally, back to you.
Brian, Katie, thank you. Thank you for your passion. Thank you for providing direction through the action alert. And thank you for making this webinar possible. We are deeply grateful. Jennifer, and I just want to remind all of the participants that if you do have questions, please enter those in the Q&A at the bottom of the Zoom, and you can see the toolbar, and hopefully you see the Q&A and can enter your questions. Jennifer, what are the reasons that unaccompanied minors leave their country of origin and come to the United States?
Well, you did a good job of mentioning some in your prayer at the beginning, and there's also what Evelyn mentioned. So they could be fleeing poverty, they could be fleeing climate change, they could be fleeing persecution, such as people from their own government or people from criminal organizations in their country targeting them or targeting their family. They could be fleeing for their lives. Or they could be coming to attain the American dream. They could have received promises from the person who will become their trafficker of good things that won't materialize.
Jennifer, thank you for clarifying that for us. Evelyn, I was wondering, if you could help us, and are there key ways the courts might be able to spot a potential trafficking victim, especially if they're a child?
Yes, thank you, Sister Sally. Before I answer your question, I know while I was listening, there was a question in the chat. Can I answer that? I saw a question
You
that was
sure?
directed to me.
Yeah, please do.
Okay. So I think the question is, how can the court help to rebound and recover the trafficker? Recovery from trafficking. So, I mean, the question to me is a little tricky because I think when I mentioned earlier, I talked a lot about the one lawyer that I had. Like, again, my case was like in the early 2000s. And I know that the work that I do at the Human Trafficking Legal Center, we have been able to do some training with the court system and attorney. But when you talk about rebound and recovery, the court really didn't understand where I was coming from, especially being a minor. So I would say that when it comes to the recovery, it was really my lawyer, Melanie, that I mentioned, that really helped me to just feel a little bit better about the situation and understanding the situation. And, not to feel guilty, because again, as children and my trafficker, again, there were so many words that she used to say that I was ugly, I'm horrible, I deserve everything that was happening to me. So when thinking about the judge, I mean, the judge in my case was okay. And I would just say that, no offense to the men, but there were so many women in my case that I call them badasses because they just really took their time to really understand that I was the kid and this was wrong. So they were part of, helping me with the recovery. But I also was disappointed with the court system because a restitution order was given. There was a restitution order in my case of $100,000 dollars, but I never really understood that I could get that money. That was never explained. My attorney explained that. So if when a restitution court a restitution is ordered, it will be really nice to explain to your clients about it, because it can also help as part of the recovery. Because honestly, if I had that restitution, I will be paying off my student loan right now. It is so important. That could be part of the rebound. That could be part of the recovery. And even with therapy right now, it's very difficult. You know, trying to go back home, I had to work really hard, to go back home to do my own reunion with my own family after not seeing them for 18 years. So it is so important. So the court did not help me. That's why the court needs training. The court needs to be able to understand the situation, especially when you're a minor, especially if it happened to you as a kid. Like I think Jennifer said it, a 3-year-old standing there is so scary. It's so traumatizing. You know, like even me going back and have to testify against my trafficker, it is so scary. Like if I could find it a way that kids don't have to go to court, I will vote yes, the kids don't have to go to court in order to prove they're innocent. You know, I will really vote on that because it can be so traumatizing. And to go back to your question, Sister Sally, you know, again, for me, is for them to be able to identify, to really know what trafficking means, because we have had so many discussions. There's forced migration, there's this, you know, and it's still hard for people to be identify trafficking. So if you're in the court system, how can they tell if that person is a victim of trafficking? That's why training is important, and have survivors like myself and other survivor leaders that have been out of the situation, are working on their healing, and they want to help with the situation, get training, you know, to get training to learn how to identify, because not everybody that comes in that court system, especially as a child, is a victim of trafficking. You know, I came, again, I did not know, and we don't know that we're victims of trafficking. I did not know I was a victim of trafficking until it was investigated and pointed out. And so it's really important for the court system to truly understand what trafficking means. That way they will not have it mixed up with, you know, child exploitation or, you know, migration, because I think a lot of the time we get that mixed up, you know, but we really have to understand that a lot of the time migrants end up becoming victims of trafficking.
Evelyn, thank you so much for that.
So I hope I answered the question to whoever asked the question.
Yes, you definitely did. And thank you for, once again, your willingness to share your own personal experience and to be proactive in the ways that we can prevent human trafficking. Jason, there's been a positive impact of introducing this legislation and this bill. Can you talk a little bit more about what's been the positive impact so far? And, you know, are there other key ways that you believe could be helpful?
Yeah, great questions. So I think the Children's Court Act held up a model that positively influenced the guidance that the U.S. immigration court system issued the month following this the bill's introduction. And that guidance, as I mentioned during my presentation, affirmed the establishment of what it calls juvenile dockets at immigration courts throughout the country. Properly implemented, that guidance holds significant potential to strengthen due process, tighten government efficiency, and to better protect vulnerable children against trafficking and exploitation. KIND is going to be monitoring implementation of that guidance at various courts throughout the country. It's critical that the administration and that individual courts faithfully institute that guidance as written. I also think it's invaluable that Congress exercise oversight to ensure that faithful implementation. More actions, however, need to be taken. You know, it's worth noting that the Children's Court Act itself does not provide funding for attorneys who play such a critical role in identifying and responding to trafficking indicators. So additional actions that we believe are invaluable are for Congress to provide more robust funding to the Office of Refugee Resettlement for administration of its unaccompanied child legal services program to move us closer to the day when no child faces immigration court alone. We also believe the time has come to pass into law Senator Hirono's Fair Day in Court for Kids Act, which would guarantee every unaccompanied child an attorney as they face immigration court. So those are a few key additional actions needed that I would flag.
Jason, thank you so much. And Jennifer, I was wondering if you wouldn't mind taking this question that's come in. You know, what is it about forced migration that exposes children to a greater risk of trafficking? You know, are minors who are forced migrants more likely to be trafficked than persons who migrate through legal pathways?
I will try to answer. If Evelyn or Jason have ideas, I'm happy to hear from them too. I think children who are forced to migrate are more at risk for trafficking because they're more likely to be in a vulnerable situation. Immigrating through legal pathways would require immigrating with family. So a child's parent might be the person who sponsor them, or another family might sponsor the parent and the child, or an employer might sponsor the parent and the child. But in all of those cases, the child is not unaccompanied. The thing that makes the children most vulnerable is the fact that they're not with the person who has been raising them. Of course, there's child abuse. Of course, there are parents who mistreat their own children. But what is most common is that the person who's committing the trafficking or the mistreatment isn't the person who has been raising the child up to that point.
Thank you,
And
Jennifer.
I'll also
Yeah,
jump
Jenna,
in
yeah, please,
and I'll just
Jason.
add that there are lawful pathways that I think the U.S. government has an opportunity to strengthen that can meaningfully help combat, child trafficking and exploitation. One at top of mind is the Central American Minors Program, through which certain parents and legal guardians residing with lawful immigration status in the U.S. and who have children residing in Northern Central America and who face danger there can apply for those children so that those children then have an opportunity through an in-country processing program to seek relocation to the U.S., reunification with those parents, either as refugees or through parole. And so that means that these kids, rather than, for example, needing to flee directly to the U.S.-Mexico border, can have an opportunity to arrive with status, be directly reunified with their parents, which serve as bulwarks against some of those risks of trafficking and exploitation. So I think programs such as that are a critical piece of kind of the larger toolkit for combating child trafficking and exploitation.
Thanks, Jason, for that addition.
Yeah.
Evelyn, there's a question in the chat for you. At the age of 9, why did you leave Cameroon? Maybe this person is asking, maybe you said it, but I missed it. I know you said you were in a 6. Could you talk a little bit about what was the reason you were leaving Cameroon?
Yeah, I'll add that. The question goes perfectly with what Jennifer and Jason just added regarding, vulnerability of children. And just to echo that, just to state that also when we're thinking about child forced labor children, there are also US citizen children that are stuck into forced labor. There's a African American young lady, Kendra Ross, that was trafficked at same age as as me in a court, in a Muslim environment, and was forced to sell in a restaurant without going to school. I would say what makes it more vulnerable for children, again, because it's so easy for people to take advantage of children, because a lot of times our children, we're trying to grow, we still don't know and understand how life works. And coming from where you come from, I think Jennifer touch on it, like from where I came from, my parents were no longer together, and I was forced to go live with my uncle that worked for a lot of wealthy people in Cameroon. And one of those wealthy people that my uncle worked for was actually my trafficker. And we have to understand that poverty is one of the reasons of vulnerabilities. Even as children, if we see our parents are not financially stable, like the program that Jason is mentioning, it would have been great to have programs like that. But if you come from places like, Latin America, Africa, Asia, as children, we help out our parents, and our parents want better opportunity. Like, it costs money to go to school in Cameroon. Like, there's no free public school in Cameroon. So, if my parents are not financially stable, it makes it hard for them to be able to provide me with the things that I need. So we have to also think about, if we really want to end child forced labor, let's look at the parents, their environment. Let's see where they're coming from, see how they're also struggling. And sometimes we as children, we want to help our parents. And cultural wise, like, we were taught to help our parents. So to answer the question of the young the person that asked, I came at age 9, and for me, the reason for me was because my parents, were not together. I was living with my uncle. I wanted to be with my parents. I just didn't feel happy. And then I always I was so fascinated by the television shows that I mentioned. I just thought that coming to America, my life would be like the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. Someone would adopt me. I'll go to school. I'll have black and white friends. That was my reason for saying yes and getting excited, because I was living with my uncle, even though he was like a father. And so for my parents, my mother in particularly, for her, she just thought, oh, wow, America is a land of opportunity. If my daughter is being taken away by this woman, she will be able to be a good girl, go to school, and take care of us financially. She can be a lawyer. So we have to think about, there are many reasons. I think Jennifer mentioned, but that was the reason for me, was I just was so fascinated by America. And for my mom, it was for me to get a better education and to help them out when I, become an adult. And we also have to think about adoption, because my trafficker, I thought she was going to adopt me. She was going to be like a mother figure to me. But the fact that I was a child and she needed someone to take care of her children, she could take advantage of that situation.
Thank you, Evelyn. Jason, I don't know if you can quickly address this question. If there is inadequate funding, what's going to be the impact of this legislation if it passes?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think part of the beauty of this legislation is that it does not require appreciable costs over and above the general administration of the immigration court system as it is. And in fact, as mentioned, the immigration court system is already instituting the recently issued guidance affirming the establishment of juvenile dockets around the country. So we're not talking about significant costs over and above the status quo. Instead, we're talking about, I think, pragmatic, common sense changes in procedure, training, and approach that can create more fairness for kids, more efficiencies for government that can actually save the government resources in the long run, while combating child trafficking and exploitation.
Thanks, Jason. Well, unfortunately, our time is running out. A special thank you to our three panelists, as well as to Katie and Fran, and to each of you for joining us today. Let me remind you that we're planning a third webinar in this series. We'll let you know as soon as possible the date and time, but it will be sometime in April. During the next webinar, we will explore the dignity of work for asylum seekers and discuss ways to promote work authorizations. So once again, we thank you for your time and your continued interest in this vitally important work as we work to ensure the God-given dignity of every child. Blessings on the rest of your day, and we look forward to seeing you in April. Take care.